Yellow, and how is everyone this fine evening? I got a question for everyone at the end of the video, so if you don't mind, would you please leave your answers in the comments section below? Exciting! So now shall we begin? Let's say you live in a country with two political parties who hold a monopoly on your political system. Now, how would two political parties maintain such a monopoly? Well, first, you rig the electoral system in order to favor larger, pre-established parties. Then you move on to public perception, and you manipulate it into believing that that's the way things have been and should be. Not to mention convincing as many people as you can that somehow voting for a third or other party is inherently a wasted vote. Not to mention those, which I've heard myself tell people, that somehow if you don't vote at all, you shouldn't have any say in politics. Thus, by adding incentive upon incentive to keep people voting for the two main parties, completely discounting third parties and other options, such as showing your discontent with the current political state by not voting at all. Of course, there are other reasons people don't vote. It could be health problems. They could also simply live too far away from the nearest voting booth to really warrant trying to go in, when really everyone's options have been limited between two different groups that largely only represent one of two specific sides. These two sides, of course, forming because in order to maintain at least some perception of there being distinction between the two parties, they have to show the distinction. They have to be opposed inherently to much of what the other side supports, which can lead to quite a few problems unto itself, such as bad policies being kept in effect for longer because one of the major parties takes position against it. By default, the other major party has to at least give some amount of support for it, even if it's only token support, thus by slowing down the process and getting rid of that bad policy. Of course, the same process can prevent a lot of good policy as well, as if that policy came from one of the two main parties monopolizing the system or someone affiliated with them. It leads to the problem that by default the other side has to be opposed to that policy, or the very least in a token way, which slows down the policy from being able to be passed, potentially doing harm to the nation as a whole, or at the very least preventing it from progressing, with good, sound-minded policy backing it up. This battle over policy potentially leading to a sense of opposition between the two groups growing. In fact, one of the best ways for two large parties to keep people voting for them is to use rhetoric in order to spread resentment and distrust between their supporters and the supporters of the other party. This resentment and distrust between the two groups, if it's allowed to grow unchecked, will eventually lead to open hostility within society between the two groups. And if that ain't kept in check, it can lead to open confrontation that wouldn't be able to be truly controlled without both parties cracking down on their voting base, which will, of course, weaken their base. And neither side will want to try to end their monopoly over the system by letting things break down like that. They'll, of course, continue using the same rhetoric and eventually turning as many people as they can against the other, and by demonizing everyone they can. The demonization getting to the point where both sides effectively feel if you don't vote their way all the time, you are inherently the enemy. They turn a question on what is politically right and wrong to frequently to questions of what is morally correct and wrong. And morality is a religious sentiment. When you get a religious sentiment involved with politics, it can't end well for the rest of society. Of course, we should all try to live by some sort of moral standard, but that's not the place for politicians. That's the place for individuals making their own decision of what's truly right and wrong in this world. The moment you give in to groupthink and to effectively reducing oneself to a member of the herd, it eventually leads to your shepherd becoming effectively a wolf in shepherd's clothing. Their primary goal is to satiate their own needs, not tend to the flock. So the question I'd like to leave you with is, should we continue to allow two parties to hold a monopoly over the system? Thank you for your time, and I look forward to reading your comments in the comments section below. See you around.